We can start the presentation too. I can admit them.
I'm still waiting for my co-host.
Okay. Amina, do you want to go first? Would that be okay with you?
Actually, my co-host is not present. I think she went to say her prayers. So can we wait for a minute?
Okay, no problem. We'll go ahead and start introducing the panel and then.
All right then, can you guys hear me? Okay, Salam alaikum. It is my pleasure to introduce our esteemed panel today. Joining us today are Sara Mahmood, who's currently a student of philosophy of applied psychology at the University of Punjab, Pakistan. She has a special interest in the area of Islamic psychology. Next, we have Mahira Ahmed. She's received her master's degree in industrial organizational psychology, and she's currently a lecturer at the Kennard College for Women. We also have with us Rakin, who's a child and adolescent psychiatry fellow at NYU Grossman School of Medicine and an American Psychiatric Association Diversity Leadership Fellow. We also have with us Balkozar Adam, who is a child and adolescent psychiatrist who graduated from the Cairo Medical School in Egypt and completed her adult and child psychiatry training at the University of Missouri, Columbia. We also have with us Amina Malik, who's currently enrolled in a master's in clinical psychology in the Center for Clinical Psychology at the University of Punjab in Lahore. We also have with us Rabia Dasti, who received her master's degree in clinical psychology. She's currently a lecturer at the Center for Clinical Psychology at the University of the Punjab in Lahore. Finally, we also have with us Sameera Ahmed, who holds a Ph.D. in clinical psychology and has a private clinical practice in Canton, Michigan, and has taught classes at a variety of universities across the nation. She's currently a leading expert on American Muslim youth and has produced numerous groundbreaking publications and is the Family and Youth Institute Director. Welcome, everyone.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. After the introductions, we are ready to move on to our first panel. Just a couple of housekeeping rules. We'll start with all three panels, and following that, we will have a discussion by our discussant Sameera Ahmed. And after that, we will have the stage open for question and answers. Please feel free to click Sameera during the presentations and throw any questions that you have directly via chat at her. You can also send out questions to any individual presenters as you see fit. You just have to double click their name in the chat option and you should be able to send them your questions directly. Welcome again. Sarah, are we good to go?
Shall we begin with the first presentation?
Yeah, I'm waiting to see if Sarah is ready. Sarah, are we good to go?
You can start the presentation.
Okay, great.
Assalamu alaikum and a very warm welcome to everyone. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. In the name of Allah, the most gracious and the most merciful. I'm really obliged to have this opportunity to present my topic titled Social Connectedness, Self-Compassion and tolerance for disagreement among Madrassah students. My co-host is Ms. Mahira Ahmed. She is assistant professor at Connectedness College for Women. This is basically my BS dissertation. Next slide. So first I would be leading towards introduction. Why particularly Madrassah students? In order to gain an insight into the psychological world of Madrassah students, it is extremely pertinent to gain an understanding of their social world. An important component of their social world is connectedness. Now, what is meant by connectedness? One person connects or interacts with the other person, specifically forming an in-group, and how he or she reacts towards their out-group. Next comes self-compassion. Self-compassion allows them to see their own experiences in a greater perspective. As a part of human nature, contradictions are to be faced at any point in life. It also does not need to be severe enough to harm the existing relationships. Next. So my study method that I utilized was quantitative method, and the sample for my study was 250 madrasa students who were recruited from the 4 registered madrasas of Lahore, Pakistan, including Jamia Ashrafia, Darul Uloom Naimia, Madrasa Faisal al-Banat, and Jamia Sirajia Naimia. So basically these were based on 5 different sects of Islam. And the sampling strategy that was recruited, it was purposive mainly, which is a non-probability technique. Next comes the design. The following assessment measures were used: social connectedness scale revised, self-compassion scale, and for measuring how they react to the disagreement and conflict, tolerance for disagreement scale was used. In order to check and examine whether these differences occur within the demographics, age, gender, as both male and female madrasa students were recruited in the study, their residential status was taken into account, whether they belong to a border status or a non-border status, what effect does it has actually on their socialization and social interaction with other mainstream students. Also, birth order was taken into account, and last but not the least, family system. Next. Now, when we want to see from a clinical context, it is pivotal to get a perspective of madrasa students. They are usually considered as violent and aggressive. This aspect only supports the notion of extremism. My study was contrary to it. It highlighted the positive aspect of such segregated students, which implies that counseling guidance should be given to such students in order to help them inculcate good moral values, such as compassion and tolerance, which are requisite for developing harmonious relationships. Further, it helps to break the stereotype of our society that madrasa students are less social, more self-centered, and less tolerant. Next, it is a need of the hour to acknowledge their upward mobility. This first picture on your left-hand side is depicting the integration of 150 university mainstream and madrasa students engaging in a healthy and constructive interaction, which is organized by the Pakistan Institute of Peace Studies and Islamabad-based think tank. So such kind of interactions, they provide a leeway, they provide a platform for social harmony. And madrasa students, they tend to take part in such activities in order to enhance their potential and socialize with other students. On the right-hand side, which is a very well-known achievement, the students from Madrassah, they won a robotics competition at Texas University. It is actually demonstrating the need for achievement, the need for motivation. They are both intrinsically and extrinsically motivated to achieve something. And they are not self-centered in that way. They engage in forming groups with others. They want to help others. Next. How my topic is particularly relevant to the Islamic tradition. As you can see, that the Pakistan's religious schools, madrasas, they trace their traditions back through a nearly 1,000 years of Islamic teaching. You can see that it has roots in former times. Being Muslims, considerable number of Pakistanis want their children to get Islamic education. On the other hand, madrasas provide the opportunity to fortify the level of tolerance for religious disagreements. The variable that was in my study, it was only tolerance for disagreement, but I wanted to focus that what kind of disagreements do they tolerate, whether it is general, but specifically I'm pointing towards the religious disagreements. And according to the study and literature cited by Fayaz in 2014, it was stated that the level of brutality against society, the level of hardship was significantly lower among these students, implying that they do not violate the norms of society. They really care for others and what is happening around. Next. Madrasa students, they form a sizable number of the Muslim population. As the report by International Crisis Group in 2019 puts madrasa enrollment from 5 lakh to 1.5 million. That's really a huge number, just imagine. Moreover, they engulfed an innate desire for identifying largely with humanity. What came out of my study, that they engage in healthy interactions with other human beings that does not necessarily involve interpersonal interaction, which means that it is not necessary for them to meet regularly, but they still have a sense of connectedness within them. And by doing so, they tend to institutionalize their sense of connectedness. Also, significant gender differences were found in the form that male madrasa students were found to show a higher propensity for the tolerance of diverse opinions. They focus more on what others say, and that is why others' opinions matter to them most. In our Pakistani culture and society, male tend to be more adaptive and adjust to the crisis in a more constructive way, rather than fixating on trivial issues. Next. Mental health. Now, considering the mental health of madrasa students, it became evident that the isolation subscale of self-compassion appeared to be a significant positive predictor, implying that mental health practitioners, they must be able to generate a context where internalization and introspection is possible for them, where they can truly realize their own self. What is the difference between introspection and internalization? Introspection is actually studying yourself deeply. We are humans, we make errors, we can be right, at the same time we can be wrong. So such students are not extraordinary, they are also humans, they can make errors, but how they tend to institutionalize, how they tend to internalize this sense of belonging is marked by the variable of social connectedness, and we search for it. So for the conventional madrasa authorities, such as teachers, ulamas, they should provide opportunities for socialization, which will enable them to nourish their selves in order to optimize the level of tolerance among them. The teachers and the ulama, they should create an environment which help the madrasa students to nourish and to flourish in every domain of life, not specifically the religious education, but also extra and non-curricular activities. Additionally, this would help to create awareness among society regarding madrasa students and their psychological needs particularly. They also need love. They also have a sense of belonging. They also need privacy and security. And all these psychological needs, they need to be addressed in order to help them flourish. Next. So summing up it all, it can be concluded that when madrasa students socially connect with their group only, then they tend to show considerable over-identification, which means that they can over-identify with their group, but they still tend to show a kind attitude towards the out-group. That is, they showed more concern for social interactions in out-group, which my study revealed, than the in-group. Now, the general perception was they are more self-centered. They tend to only listen to the concerns which are raised in their own groups. But my study, my research found out that they tend to interact more with other students, and they show high degree of compassion, which increase the probability to a greater level of tolerance. There is a famous quote by G. Campbell Morgan. He's a British prolific writer who said that seeing is not believing. Seeing is seeing, and believing is being confident without seeing. So you should not rely on the stereotypes blindly. You should check other aspects as well, especially when we refer to such students. Next. Clinical implications that many students of madrasa, they belong to the middle class socioeconomic status, yet they are capable, despite of the financial constraints, they can compete with other mainstream students, and they also interact with other students. Madrasa, it ought to be seen as a social entity rather than a political one in order to reinstate the healing, the liberative process, and discharge the negative connotations. Most importantly, it provides psychologists and researchers with some features of attitudes and behaviors among madrasa students that ought to be explored further. Thank you very much. I think I have revealed my ideas through this topic, and I'm here and welcome you all for the questions. I would really like to answer, and so nice of you for hearing me. Thank you once again, Jazakallah.
Thank you so much, Sarah. It was an awesome presentation. Just a reminder, for all questions, we have a Q&A in the end. You can type one of the moderators, either me or Anne-Marie, on your chat and send us the questions. You can also send the questions directly to the panelists if you would like. And after Sameera has done the discussion in the end, we will have a Q&A. Moving on to our next presentation, Amina, you can go ahead and share your screen, all yours.
Okay, thank you. Assalamu alaikum everyone, it's Amina Malik from Pakistan, and my co-speaker is Miss Rabia Dasti. Today, I'm currently in masters, doing masters in clinical psychology from one of the prestigious institute of Pakistan, University of the Punjab. This is presentation is a part of my BS dissertation. Today, I'm going to present use of pornography, religious and spiritual struggle among Muslim young adults of Pakistan. So let me tell you the literal meaning of pornography. So pornography is the explicit portrayal of sexual content just for the purpose of sexually arousing the people who are watching it. It includes website, either picture, videos that illustrate people having sex, etc. So now the it's gender related statistics in Pakistan. So until now there is insufficient data, or there are very few studies conducted on this topic in Pakistan. So there is not a we can say a fixed prevalence rate we have. So according to the report published by Pornhub website in 2017, according to which women watch more sexually explicit material or pornography on their smartphone than men. The ratio of the woman was 86%, which was 12% greater, and it was very much alarming situation or a report, you can say, to a culture or a country, Pakistan, a Muslim country. Now, what are the effects of pornography on the mental health of an individual? People who watch pornography may experience poor mental health, which may include shame, anxiety, loneliness, and depression. Loneliness and pornography use has two-way relationship. Either person who is watching pornography may experience loneliness, or the person who is lonely may start watching pornography as a compensatory behavior. Another research reported that individuals consuming internet pornography may experience emotional difficulties, negative thoughts, and functional impairment. And functional impairment, it may be it in different settings, less as if a student is watching, then he may suffer problems in his academic setting, and if a person who is working, he may suffer problem in his occupational work, in his occupational setting, in work he is doing. Or it may if a person who started watching pornography at a very young age, it may shape his sexual perception. Let's suppose if a young adolescent start watching pornography just to answer his curiosities, curiosity. A young mind who is seeking answers from not a better way, means he's watching started watching just to answer his curiosities. It may really affect his sexual perception. He may start perceiving it in a normal way, and may start it may lead to sexual it may also adversely affect his sexual activity. Body image, so body image is very much common in women start comparing themselves to the people who are in videos. They start comparing themselves, start comparing their genitals with the persons who are in videos. Sexual objectification, it is very much common in men who start viewing women as a sex object. And sexual aggression of an individual, it is related to the violent pornography, such as a person who started watching pornography may normalize the observed behavior he is watching. In his observe he is watching, let's suppose he is watching violent pornography, he may start normalizing this behavior and show his behavior or his tolerance level towards aggressive violent behavior increase, and it may lead him, or he may commit a crime such as include rape and sexual assault towards women. Now, what is its relevance to the Muslim population and Islamic tradition? If we talk about Quran and Hadith, there is no such explanation about pornography, but it does address about zina. But according to our religious scholars and Islamic religious scholars, watching pornography is forbidden or haram because it is a zina of eyes. Or if we talk about the country, Pakistan being a Muslim state was rated at the top amongst other 8 Islamic countries for searching porn material. And for moreover, our Google report published in 2015, according to which Pakistan was was at the most at the top of the countries searching for the porn related material, and the searches were leading to sex with animals like goats, snakes, etc. And now these psychological problems and religious values instigate us or warrant us we should carry out a research study to uh, to find out the possible risk factors that are increasing or predisposing an individual in a country like Muslim in a Muslim country like Pakistan to watching porn. Now, religious and spiritual struggle. So, pornography is related to religious and spiritual struggle. An individual who is so now, first of all, let me tell you what the religious and spiritual struggle mean. So, religious and spiritual struggle is individuals' beliefs and experiences that are causing persistent distress. It may be an internal conflict that may turn into negative emotions such as guilt, anger, sadness, etc. So, finding out the relationship between the use of pornography and religious spiritual struggle in the youth has very much importance, and we should find out why even though these activities or these watching porn is very much strictly prohibited in Islam, but what predispose them or what put them to watch this porn, even though there are very much sanctions or forbidden or prohibited by our religion. Now in this present study we collected the data through Google's form online data. So there were 385 participants, out of which 154 were those who watched pornography, who were watching pornography. Then these 154 were taken as a sample for this study. Out of which 154 participants, there were 75 men and 79 women. We use correlational research designed to study to find out the relationship between study variables. Purposive sampling technique was used because we only chose those who were watching pornography, and we use cyber pornography use inventory, pornography consumption inventory to find out the motivation behind using pornography. Religious and spiritual struggle scale. In the religious and spiritual struggle scale, we only use 3 subscale that were divine, moral, and interpersonal subscale because the literature had shown the relationship of pornography and these 3 subscales only. Now, what we found out from our study, the most alarming finding in our study was that the more number of the women, greater number of women confirmed or affirmed that they use pornography. And was very much alarming, like in a country in Pakistan coming forward and say like we are watching pornography, even though, like I stated earlier, that the rate of women was 86%, which was greater than men, and which was greater than men. So it was this finding was in line with the researches that the use of pornography is also increasing in women. Moreover, we also found out a significant positive relationship between use of pornography and religious and spiritual struggle, subscales, divine, moral, and interpersonal subscales. And we ran gender differences on these religious and spiritual struggle subscales. We found out that in men experience interpersonal, religious, and spiritual struggle more than women, whereas there was no difference was found out between divine and moral subscales. So about interpersonal, religious, and subscale, there was a study conducted in Indonesia, which according to which men and women express similar level of religiousness towards their religion, devotion toward their religion, but according to that research, men might experience or struggle more, experience more struggle, religious or spiritual struggle than women. Moreover, we also found out gender differences on pornography watching or use of pornography and motivations behind using pornography. So men were watching pornography more than women, and this was in line with the literature. We use pornography consumption inventory scale to find out the motivations behind pornography. So that scale had four subscale that were emotional avoidance, sexual curiosity, excitement seeking, and sexual pleasure. So by gender differences, we found out that men watch pornography more than women because of their sexual curiosity, excitement seeking, that is to escape into the fantasy world, and sexual pleasure. And this whereas we were didn't find any gender difference on emotional avoidance. And due to the globalization and advancement in technology and unrestricted use of internet, the rate of pornography is increasing in the youth, and it has considerable effect on the social, personal, and mental health of young adults. Therefore, the policies makers must pay heed to this prevalent issue and start working firstly with the men, importantly with the men, because the rate is very much high in them, and should work on their spiritual struggle, should work with the young generation spiritual struggle that they are experiencing because of their pornography use. Now, what are the clinical implications of this study? If we talk about Pakistan, so a government has recently banned a lot of pornography websites that were giving access to the even to the minor, but still people have a lot of ways, because internet you can find 1,000 or so, yeah, more than even 1,000 ways to find out this type of material. But still there is need of policies, there are needs of policies to control its use, and planning of strategies to counter its excessively common use among young generation. And as this study explained the religious and spiritual struggles, so there should be religious and spiritual intervention along with the treatment or therapies to help the client deal with issues, or awareness should be given. Like if we talk about Pakistan, it is very hard for a person to come forward come forward and uh, for help or seeking help from mental health professional about issues related to sexuality and all. So the awareness should be given on different platforms, like on social media, which is commonly being used these days. Without any fear of judgment, they can get help from the respective professionals. Moreover, there is need to explore other risk factors that may predispose an individual towards pornography consumption, with view of its behavioral and emotional problems that are associated with watching pornography. That's it. Thank you very much. And thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to present my work on this amazing platform. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Amina. What an important topic, and what wonderfully presented. You can go ahead and stop screen share, and we're ready for our third presentation of the panel. And I will defer to you, and Dr. Balkozar, Adam, and stage all yours. You can go ahead, share your screen, and begin.
Great, so we can begin sharing. Excellent, excellent. Very moment. It does not appear I have the ability to share quite yet. There we go. Okay, Assalamu alaikum everyone. My name is Rakin Hawk. As mentioned before, I'm a child and adolescent psychiatry fellow working out of NYU. I just want to say I am incredibly honored and thankful to be here with all of you on this stage at this conference, and of course, working with a very important mentor to me, Dr. Balkozar Adam. So I do not have any financial disclosures at this time. I joke that maybe one day when I'm more grown up, I will. But as of now, I don't. Dr. Adam does not either. And of course, as a reminder, Amina is committed to providing CME activities that are fair, balanced, and free of bias. All the disclosure information should be available to all of you in your handouts. So we have a lot of ground to cover today. Firstly, I mean, to understand what acculturation means, how that process works, and how this relates to Muslim youth, it's important as a backdrop to establish, the presence of the Muslim population. Today, full disclosure, we are talking, the data is more specific to the United States, although the issues at hand, I believe, would be generalizable to the Muslim youth experience in any Western country. But we will be discussing the history of Islamophobia in the United States, and then that will help give a foundation for talking about what the process of acculturation means, how it works, the factors that go into it. And then, it's also important to understand the basics of adolescent psychological development if we're going to understand how acculturation and Islamophobia and then just regular adolescent development sort of create this perfect trifecta for the unique stress profile that afflicts Muslim youth in Western society. And this will all be followed by Dr. Adam discussing potential interventions for how we can best support the unique stresses of immigrant Muslim youth. So we have to remind ourselves that the United States truly is a country of immigrants. 2.2 million children alone in this country are estimated to have been born outside of the US. So that'd be first generation immigrants. But immigrant children are not simply kids that were born outside of the US. That would include children like myself who were born and raised here in the United States, but my parents immigrated from Bangladesh. So in 2012, about 18 million, or a quarter of American children, would be categorized as immigrants. That proportion has certainly increased since then. This graph, this image really just shows the ever-growing proportion of immigrants in the United States. And there has been a major shift in immigration patterns. So in 1960, what we see here is the US immigrant population was primarily from European countries. And that's what we see, right? The vast majority of this pie. But as we move forward to 2012, you don't really see so much European countries. European countries would now fit a sliver of this other country's portion, but rather we see a lot of Eastern Hemisphere and Southern Hemisphere countries outside of Europe, a lot of these countries including Muslim predominating populations. So that tells us that more Muslims are immigrating in recent years. So I don't need to tell you guys in our audience, but most of us should know that Islam is, without question, the fastest growing religion in the world. In 2015, it was estimated that Muslims made up about a quarter of the world's population, which is quite remarkable. And with the growth rates at that time, if they were to persist at that growth rate, then we could foresee a 70% increase in the Muslim population worldwide by the year of 2060, which is quite amazing. Even in the United States, the Muslim population has grown significantly. So we see that in just 10 years, between 2007 to 2017, the Muslim population in the United States has grown by almost 50%. But at that same time, it's important to take a step back and remind ourselves that even despite that growth, the Muslim population in the United States only accounts for about 1% of the American population. So Islamophobia has a very extensive, long-standing, deeply rooted history in Western society. If we go all the way back to the 19th century, the Muslim faith was quite stigmatized. It was viewed irreconcilable from this quality of whiteness at the time that was required for citizenship. But if we want to fast forward to modern history, the 1993 World Trade Center bombing was certainly an accelerant for the stigma, the American stigma against Muslims. But of course, it was 9/11 that was the true sentinel event that really led to the largest, dramatic rise in Islamophobia in the United States. And since then, there have been a number of events that have, reinforced this issue at hand. And then more broadly, worldwide, destabilization of the Middle East has certainly led to a rise in radical groups, and it is the imagery of radical groups that, you know, continues to sort of throw fuel on the flame of this issue of discrimination. Now, one really remarkable thing, and this is to shine light on just how divisive the last 5 years has been for us as Americans, and I would think, you know, largely worldwide, there has been a renewed level of anti-Muslim hate crimes. So if we look here at 2001, right, with 9/11, this was, of course, you know, a major sentinel event that led to an all-time rise in Muslim hate crimes. And things seem to settle to some degree, but with the 2016 presidency, the rise in Muslim hate crimes went even beyond where we were at in 2001, which is really quite alarming for us. So American Muslims, in a study by the Pew Research Center, many inherently feel rejected in the society due to their faith. And there are several misconceptions within the broader society. It's commonly misconceived that Muslims reject their host culture identity. But the reality is the vast majority of Muslim Americans are quite proud to be American. Similarly, it's also a common misconception that most Muslims residing in a country like the United States must be from other countries. But the reality is most American Muslims were born in the United States. They're native citizens. And another common misconception, again, I mean, Islamophobia itself is a multifactorial and complex issue. But certainly this whole stigma around radicalized Islam is a very big part of Islamophobia. But the reality is worldwide, the vast majority, without question, of Muslims reject fundamentalism. So how do we define acculturation? Acculturation, simply put, is a process of cultural and psychological change that results from the meeting of two or more cultures. It is often a spectrum of all kinds of factors that play into one's acculturation experience, and one's acculturation experience is highly variable depending on, you know, their individual life. This applies to all generations of immigrants, whether someone themselves is a first generation, born in another country and moving here, or someone like myself, who was born and raised here as a child of immigrants, or potentially even my children one day. The components of acculturation are quite varied. Name, language, food, way of dress, religious practice, belief systems, cultural norms, all of these play into how one's acculturation experience might develop. And of course, this is more relevant than ever as we are a more globalized society than we have ever been. So John Barry is a psychologist who is sort of famed for his model of acculturation, which is largely one of the most cited models of acculturation we look to. But he defined 4 distinct orientations of acculturation. Firstly is integration. And this is when an individual is able to find a middle ground in being able to adapt their identity with their culture of origin with the dominant culture surrounding them. This is viewed as the most adaptive acculturation strategy, most protective to one's overall wellness. And secondly is assimilation, and this is more replacing one for another. This is when an individual effectively kind of gives up their identity with their culture of origin to replace it by the dominant culture surrounding them. And one thing we think about here is this might result in one's rejecting of their own host identity. You know, frequently you think of maybe a person with, like myself, with a traditional Bengali name, for example, and then maybe I prefer people call me Roger because I feel like I might be more accepted that way. Isolation is sort of the reverse, in that this would be an individual who digs their heels in a way and rejects the dominating culture, and insists that, for myself, for example, I identify only as Bengali and I refuse to identify as an American. And this acculturation orientation poses its own risks, which we'll talk about. And marginalization, lastly, is when an individual rejects both the culture surrounding them as well as their culture of origin. And this is what we view as the highest risk profile, the most vulnerable. So there's several factors that affect acculturation. Firstly, demographic factors. One's age, their stage of development, which is especially critical to our discussion today as we talk about developing Muslim adolescents. Their generation, socioeconomic status, their level of education. Sorry, you may have some background noise. There's several societal factors as well. Largely what we should be thinking about is how a surrounding society views this person's culture, right? In this case, we're thinking about how a Western society might view Islam and Muslims, and what kind of discrimination exists in that society, what kind of community supports might exist. Does someone, a Muslim youth, have a relatable, cultural and Muslim community to support them wherever they are? Family factors are especially critical because family is the unit that's surrounding the developing child. Beyond that, also family is typically the primary representation of the cultural identity of origin, right? So everything with the family, how cohesive the family dynamic is, how well family members communicate with each other. Parents' own individual well-being or rigidity of the family's values and beliefs are all factors that affect a developing child's acculturation experience. And then certainly personal factors, an individual's adaptability to new situations, their self-esteem, their capacity to view positivity in things surrounding them, the rigidity of their own values, their language fluency, how they view their own ethnic background, and the quality of their peer relationships is especially critical when we're talking about adolescence, and that's effectively who we're talking about today. That can be all kinds of factors. Having, whether someone has friends that are also Muslim or also of similar ethnicity, or if they don't have any such friends, or all their friends are of different ethnic groups and religions, all of these would play into what their acculturation strategy might go on to be. So one quick reminder about adolescent development, and this is a very, very, very brief, but Erickson is also another famed psychologist, known largely for this, his model of adolescent, or of human development, psychological development. We'll focus on how he defined adolescence, or how he conceptualized adolescent development, which at the time he circumscribed as years 12 to 17, but now scientifically we know that the brain is developing well past 17, and adolescence is truly well into our 20s. But whatever the case, he identified it as this identity versus role confusion stage. The key part to understand here is when we're really young, when we're little babies and young kids, our primary reference for how we fit into our world and what is okay and what is acceptable, our primary reference is our parents. And as we shift into adolescence, this shifts into peers. Our primary reference for our acceptability for who we are, for how we fit in, becomes our peer group. So for Muslim American children, who in most cases throughout the United States, for example, most Muslim Americans are going to be minorities in their surrounding environment, in their school environment. So they're often prone to a dichotomous developmental experience. And what I mean by this is, like, if I were to use myself as an example, at home, I kind of have an experience of Bangladesh, and it's a Muslim household. But when I would be at school, I was the only Bengali guy, only Muslim guy for many, many years, and it was a largely Caucasian and mostly Christian environment. But that can lead to a dichotomous experience that can pose its own challenges to the developing youth. So again, the question for the developing Muslim youth is, where do I fit in? How do I fit in? And depending on what the environment is like, this experience of trying to fit in and be accepted by peers can be dominated by, ostracization, bullying. So the Muslim child most frequently is identified as different by all kinds of factors. Maybe it's something as visible as the color of their skin, the way they dress, the fact that they may wear hijab, or some of their practices, maybe they're fasting, lunch, all kinds of factors can play into this, and they're confronted inevitably with the pressure to conform, to be like others. And within that can be a pressure to put aside their identity of origin, put aside their religious identity or their cultural identity. This increases risk of conflict at home and rejection of self. So in just like a brief kind of little diagram here, if we think about already how challenging adolescent development is on its own, we're young people trying to figure out where we fit into the world, and that is tough for so many reasons and only growing ever more complicated in the modern digital era. Now, when you add on the process of acculturating, where a child is inherently different and their culture at home is inherently different from the surrounding culture that they experience at school, that poses another complication, another barrier for feeling acceptance internally and externally. And on top of that, we throw on this widespread discrimination, this fear against Islam. And I think for many of us who maybe were raised here in the United States, I can certainly vividly recall hearing all kinds of slurs towards me after 9/11 as an elementary schooler and middle schooler. So, I mean, these are, it was a very relevant issue then and is only like more relevant now for Muslim youth developing in this modern time. And so this increases risk of any of these three acculturating strategies. So if we think about the assimilating Muslim youth, there's a much more increased risk of rejecting their Muslim identity or whatever their cultural ethnic heritage is. And this certainly increases risk for one having a lower self-esteem and fostering insecurity with oneself. And then isolation, on the other hand, would be, as noted before, someone who would then just completely reject the dominant culture around them. And what that would foster is a sense of, I'm not safe in this surrounding environment. I'm not safe, and I should avoid everyone. Except only Muslims. And this increases risk of social isolation, anxiety, social anxiety, all kinds of complicating factors. But as noted before, marginalization is what we worry about the most. And that is the child who feels rejected by, in this case, if we're talking about the United States, the largely surrounding American culture, but then also ends up feeling rejected by their culture of origin, maybe as a Muslim, as whatever their ethnic heritage is. This is certainly what we worry about the most. This is, significantly increased risk of depression, anxiety, substance use disorders. And this is where we typically see, this is like can provide a theoretical framework for how people end up in gang involvement. And now we don't really have much evidence for, a good basis for truly understanding the mechanism for radicalization in Western society, because that's, a minimal case study. It's such an incredibly rare thing that happens. But if you were to just, look at isolated cases in the UK, for example, you might think of a kid who experienced a Muslim child who experienced significant discrimination for their faith and heritage and their surrounding environment, and then finds themselves living more on the fringe with their lifestyle, ends up with a criminal offense, ends up in the criminal justice system, and at that point ends up more isolated from their cultural and religious community, maybe feeling more rejection from them. And what that leaves is a highly vulnerable young individual. And then while incarcerated, someone sells them purpose and belonging in some kind of movement. And we may use the marginalization strategy as a potential like theoretical framework for radicalization. So I'm just briefly going to touch on a few things, but Dr. Adam will really provide the meat of this issue. But there's several issues to consider when it comes to accessing treatment in general for immigrant populations. Utilization of healthcare services has huge variance across ethnicities, and that can largely depend on someone's culture of origin. But cultural stigma towards mental illness is a huge barrier, but it's also highly variable and highly unique to different ethnic populations. So if I were to just speak for Asian cultures, and this is just drawing from a few studies, but some Asian cultures perceive mental illness as reflecting negatively on family. And immigrant populations in general tend to be low utilizers of mental health care services. From one study, South Asian immigrant families were found to have distrust of confidentiality within the mental health care system. Some East Asian immigrant families perceive mental illness to reflect karma in a way. And this led to a more contained support just within personal relationships and communities. So, one major treatment limitation for us is our field in mental health, at least as psychiatrists, we're not the most diverse. Asians are fairly well represented, as we typically are in the field of medicine, kind of overrepresented, but there's huge disproportionate issues here, right? If we think about Black psychiatrists, a tiny sliver, which is totally disproportionate from the general population. The same thing for Hispanic. So there's something to be said about the limited diversity within the field, because it is certainly, it helps to reduce barriers when your clinician appears relatable and can, understand your culture. So how can these barriers be overcome? Again, Dr. Adam will have more answers on this, but just some general ideas. We certainly need to do more research in characterizing and quantifying barriers to care. Characterizing stigma requires characterizing it in specific domains, and that would help to inform intervention. And certainly intervention, public health intervention, when it comes to whole communities, should and must involve partnership with community and religious organizations. So some of the most effective public health interventions I've seen here in New York, if we're thinking about Muslim populations, have involved partnering with imams at masjids. I mean, these are our community centers, our masjids. These are sort of the cornerstones of our communities, and truly one of the most important ways to access. So with that, I mean, I'll turn this over to Dr. Adam to really explain what we can do and what we should be doing for our Muslim youth who are uniquely vulnerable.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Balkozar Adam. Jazakumullah khairan for coming, and thank you very much, Dr. Hawk, for a beautiful, extensive, very well done presentation. Today, I'm going to talk about how can we support Muslim youth. First, about the language. As you know, Muslim can be first, second, third generation, and maybe citizens, immigrant, refugee. They represent Muslim from all continents. They speak almost countless languages. It is noted that first generation Muslim often learn English to survive economically. Second generation often speak their own language at home and English at school. Now, the third generation, they often speak English both at home and at school and at the community. So because psychiatry is language-based communication, if the youth is not fluent in English, then we will have difficulty with making the diagnosis and coming up with the right treatment. This brings us to the importance of having interpreters and translators. But the translators needs to be only familiar with their translation, but also they need to be familiar with the area they are translating. So how they can translate hallucinations and delusions if they don't know what does that mean. So it was reported that maintaining the home language is important for the child to access family and community support. So that's important for our youth to learn and continue using the home language at home. Muslims often have a language spoken at home and a language spoken outside the home. And that could be a good thing for them to maintain this language because it will help them with having the support from the family and the community. Now, talking about the unique stress of immigration. So immigration is one of the most stressful experiences a family can go through. It removes the family from their relationship, friends, neighbors, extended family, community, jobs, language, and culture. They feel stranger in unpredictable environments. I want to review with you the 3 stages of migration, and I want you to keep in mind the refugee that came from Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, and other Muslim countries. During the pre-migration area, they may be experiencing war, persecution, economic hardship, and during the migration, they may face life-threatening events and physical harm. And now, after they migrate, they may struggle with poor living condition, social isolation, unemployment, and acculturation difficulties. The Muslim youth are at risk for depression and anxiety, PTSD, and the Muslim parents may focus on academic success without attention to the emotional well-being. This also combined with the stigma against mental health treatment may lead to suffering of the Muslim youth.
And Dr. Adam, please let me know when to change the slide.
Oh. So I see many Muslim families, they want their kids to be doctors, although the Muslim youth may be talented in different educational fields. This will put a lot of emotional stress on the Muslim youth, and they might not be able to achieve their goal. So moving to the next slide, acculturation stress. It is the distress, the internal conflict from adaptation to a new culture. It reflects the internal culture value conflict and the external pressure to assimilate. And also the loss of protective culture aspect while not yet adopting the new culture strengths. So during the acculturation process, youth mirror the traditional culture environment at their home and the mainstream culture environment at school and the community. This will result in conflicting images. They may face significant pressure to assimilate into the mainstream. We see girls that will struggle wearing hijab in public. We see youth uncomfortable praying in front of their friends. They will question, why not have a boyfriend or girlfriend? And why not go to prom? It is noted that while the parents want the kids to be connected to their immigrant parents' past, the kids themselves tend to be oriented to their own American future. Moving to the next slide, the role reversal and intergenerational family conflict. Many Muslim families are headed by parents with traditional culture beliefs who are experiencing the process of acculturation themselves. but without their children cognitive, linguistic, and emotional flexibility. This difference in acculturation between the parent and the children can lead to intergenerational acculturation, conflict, and psychological distress. We found that a more assimilated adolescent may assume a parentified role as a mean to assisting the less assimilated parent to navigate the new culture milieu of language, rules, and norms. So they can order from McDonald's for their parent, they can communicate with the school, with the landlord, with the medical doctor, and they can help them with their electronics. This may contribute to the role reversal, and a conflict may arise when parents attempt to assert their authority. Therefore, it is important to address the acculturation stress and intergenerational acculturation conflict in the assessment and treatment of children of Muslim families. Moving to the next slide about the role of the clinician in identifying culture strengths. Clinician should assume a posture of sincere cultural curiosity in learning about the family's cultural beliefs and value. We know that a culturally competent approach promotes the incorporation of beliefs, attitude, and cultural practice within mental health treatment. Therefore, integrating culture aspect into the implementation of evidence-based practice is important. It is thought that seeking help for children from an imam, in addition to a mental health professional, could increase access to mental health care and help family get the needed support. It is believed that the imam's explanation of illness and the perceived less stigma when seeking help from imams help Muslim youth. So I would suggest to you to encourage your colleague to support the involvement of imams in the care of Muslim youth. I would like to share with you that at this time, I see more youth seeking psychiatric and therapy compared to years ago. However, Muslim families continue to fear about sharing information, confidentiality, who they trust, and double discrimination. They are not only Muslim, they are also facing mental illness. So that may keep them from seeking help. I worked with many Muslim youth over the years, and they would like to discuss the kids' issue outside clinical setting. They had stopped me a lot at the mall, at the grocery store, and at the parking lot, and asking me about what to do about their kids. I also noticed that parents who have rigid expectation, their kids then will push back. So they will go to school and they will take their hijab at school. When the youth are uncomfortable sharing their feelings and their thoughts, then they hide things from their parents. They then become involved in high-risk behavior because they are afraid of being judged by their family and their community. The last thing I would like to discuss with you the bicultural identity. Last slide, please. I would like to suggest to you that the best adaptation is the development of bicultural identity. Being American Muslim, it provides the youth with the best of both worlds. They remain rooted in their culture of origin through their language, but they have the necessary knowledge and interpersonal skill to navigate the mainstream culture. To conclude, Muslim identity provides Muslim youth with strengths and a way of life. Living in America provides Muslim youth with freedom, openness, and opportunities. You can love both culture and be part of both cultures. Together, we will continue to look for approaches that address different generations levels of acculturation, languages, and backgrounds. Thank you for listening.
Here are some references of our covered material. And we want to make sure we are very much accessible to everyone for questions. So we'll go ahead and put our email in the chat.
Thank you very much. I will hand it over to Sameera now.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's great to be a part of this panel and be a discussant, and I thank you for the invitation. I think one of the things that was exciting for me to listen to all of you as you spoke was the fact that all of you were looking into understanding kind of what was going on developmentally and considering the developmental contextual approach of what was happening with young people. And I think that's exciting. And as we develop more of our understanding in the field, I would also urge you to consider taking an intersectional approach in terms of looking at what do these multiple identities an individual may have, social identities that may have, how does that impact what's going on? So with the presentation that we just had, if we think about immigrant youth, what's it like to be a refugee, but a refugee of color? Being Bosnian and being a Bosnian refugee is very different than being a Somali refugee because of the factor of race. And then how does socioeconomic conditions also impact? What about the neighborhood, the schools that young people are going to? All of these factors really have an impact on the experience of young people, and then really has an impact on the developmental outcomes and the trajectory a young person may take. So really, as we kind of go into the field and develop a little bit more, really think about these factors. Another kind of commonality that I noticed across all of the presentations was that as we're learning, that you were all working kind of on debunking many common misconceptions, which is really helpful and important to help grow the field. And I commend you for that. And I think as we're thinking about these things, really think about what are our own cultural biases as researchers, right? Because we too carry our own cultural biases. And as we think about and present on our community, to really think about how is it coming out and the questions we ask, how we ask those questions, and what are the implications. And I heard a little bit of that in one of our earlier presentations, to really think about what do our stereotypes mean and how is that impacting our study, to really make sure we grab it before we make conclusions. In addition, I would also caution all of us to really to not connect our work when it comes to Muslim youth to radicalization. A number of the presenters talked about it indirectly and kind of mentioning it as a side. But again, I would be very careful of connecting your work to that area because that research work is weak, lacks merit, and is rooted in Orientalism and false notion of clash of civilizations. And so really think about, again, comes back to what we've absorbed from our surroundings and how that may be impacting our work. And then kind of in terms of the larger questions that you were all exploring, some of the studies looked at used correlational studies. And it's really important that when we're using correlational studies, and sometimes we have to because there's just such little work in the field, that when we are using correlational studies, that all we can do is conclude that there is a pattern between the two continuous variables, and to really avoid making statements of causation, because we don't have an idea of what's moderating, what's mediating the pathway, what's causing what. And so really be cautious of that and as you discuss. Now going into kind of the specific studies, I would, one thing I would like to highlight, thank you, Sara and Mahira, for really exploring an important topic on social connectedness and self-compassion. for Madrassah students. It was a very interesting topic in terms of really thinking about a certain population that is often not considered, and really thinking about what does social connectedness do and mean, and how does it have an impact on the individual? And, I think that's a great topic. And I think if we can do a little bit more, I would have liked to know a little bit more about the methodology and analysis, because there was just a lot of questions that resulted. And how did you understand it? And what were the findings? And so really, I would suggest if you could share more about that, I think that would be really helpful. And as we talk a little bit about the second presentation, Amina and Rabia, use of pornography, thank you so much for highlighting an important topic that we don't really talk about. I think 2 years ago, there was a topic, somebody from Nasiha talked about pornography. And I know at the Family Youth Institute, we're really looking into that as a study, and really thinking about these issues that are often taboo topics, but these are topics that are really impacting our community, and people are really struggling. And so really, the introduction was wonderful, and really highlighting the nuances that need to be considered. I think the methodology was really nice in that we were able to kind of use different tools that are used in other communities. And I would encourage you, as you're kind of developing your area and developing the study, to really look at what are the other factors, what are some of the risk factors that you're finding, what does that tell us, and not only in terms of what you found in this study, but what are the factors that policymakers, educators, parents can take and really apply to really prevent some of these issues. Because especially nowadays, with COVID and everyone having to pivot online, this is a constant struggle. Pornography isn't what it was like 20 years ago, 30 years ago, where you really had to make an effort to get access to it. Now it just comes to your inbox. And so the topic is really relevant and really important, and I would urge you to continue your work in there, but and in so doing, really kind of think about what are the other factors in addition to kind of the religious factors that maybe that could be a method to help redirect an individual. What are the other factors that could be considered? So thank you for that addition. And then finally, to the final topic, which on acculturation and immigrant Muslim youth experience. Thank you so much. You did a really great job of introducing and contextualizing the topic, and exploring the developmental contextual approach for immigrant youth, and really applying the work that Barry's model and what it may look like and how it would look like. And one of the things I would also add with that work, when you really talked about discussing the shift from kind of European to non-European immigration, you may want to consider looking at the work of Khalid Baidoun. And he really talks about the historical development of some of what you're talking about, and goes even further back than the 1900s to the inception of this country. And so really being able to explore the impact of Orientalism and this concept of clash of civilization and how it's developed over time, and how when we think about Islamophobia, it's not a recent phenomenon, but it's rooted deeply in our community. So really thinking about what does that social, cultural, historical impact have on our nation's fabric, on our institutions, and how it continues to kind of institutionalize the Islamophobia that we see. And so in that process, what does it mean, and what is the experience of Muslim youth who are immigrants, coming into the system? How are they experiencing things? And you did a wonderful job of really talking about that hyphenated identity, right? And I would encourage you to also even look at the work of Dr. Madihat Tahsin, who just published kind of studies on looking at Muslim youth identity, and the different identities, and what are the protective factors, what are the risk factors, and what parents can actually do. And I can actually put it in the chat box in a little bit. So she has done some great work on that. In addition, there's Dr. Shireen Fine, who's really looked at it really post 9/11. Dr. Madiha's work is further past 9/11, but Shireen Fine is looking at post 9/11. So looking at both of their works together at these notions of hyphenated identity and what works and what doesn't work, I think that would be really rich understanding to strengthen your presentation. And then the other, kind of the final comment I had for your presentation was to understand when discussing the role of cultural strength. I assume cultural strength and religious strength is what you wanted to kind of integrate in this, and to really think about how is it used as a strength to promote development, and when and how is it used to have a negative impact on young people, because these are really important things, because it's not just you have these factors, but how is that religious socialization or that cultural socialization imparted, and the impact of the relationship, and how that can promote development or deter development. And so just wanted to add that as well. And, I want to thank everyone for sharing your work with us today. I think it was a really helpful and great exploration discussion, and I'll leave it open for the audience to ask questions.
Thank you very much, Sameera, for putting it all in a nice synthesis perspective. And I just was having this thought, what an incredible ability to put together 3 varied presentations all together. I do see there are some questions. Unfortunately, we are out of time. I would recommend everyone use Whova app as freely as possible. And hopefully we can get everyone's questions taken off till there. I got my red light put saying we got to stop this session now because they're waiting for the next session to start in about 4 minutes. Thank you everyone for coming. I hope you enjoyed the panel. Please feel free to put in all questions in the Whova app and reach out to the presenters directly. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.